Hello and welcome to another edition of Civic Engagement, part of our Engaging Our Communities initiative here at Edmond Community College. And for this episode, we're sitting down with King County Councilman Bob Ferguson. Bob, thanks very much for making time.
Thanks for having me, DJ.
You were saying before we got started that you're actually, you've got Everett in your blood.
Absolutely. In fact, my family's from Everett. Both my mom and my dad were born and raised in Everett, Washington. Went to Everett High School, were Everett Seagulls, graduated from Everett High School, and much of my family actually remains up in Everett, although my mom and dad eventually went down to the University of Washington and then settled in Seattle.
So one of my good friends I know is one of your good friends, Peter Jackson, the son of late Senator Scoop Jackson. Tell me about how the Jackson family and the Ferguson family intertwine.
Yeah, and the Hosmans, which is my mom's maiden name is Hosmans. So the Hosmans, Fergusons, and Jacksons were all families in Everett in the 30s, 40s, 50s. And of course, Everett was a very small town back then. So really everybody knew everybody. My mom's family had a meat market, Hosman Meats, which was on Broadway in Everett. And I know that Scoop Jackson delivered newspapers to the Broadway market. So the families knew each other back then. And I actually got to know Peter Jackson, Scoop Jackson's son, when I went to the University of Washington. We had a mutual friend and got to know each other. So we actually met separate from our families, just met at the University of Washington because we were interested in similar issues. So I got to know Peter, and he's been a close friend for many years now.
Good. And so now you're in King County, not Snohomish.
That's right.
Tell me about the district you represent. Where are the boundaries?
In fact, much of it borders Snohomish County. It's much of North King County is my district. It's District 1. We have 9 county council members, so we each represent a district. And so my district makes up much of North Seattle, goes up to Shoreline, then goes across Lake Washington. So Shoreline, Lake Forest Park, Kenmore, Bothell, even a little bit of Woodinville at the far eastern edge of my district. So right along the county line at the north end, all those cities I represent.
So for someone who has no idea, particularly in those areas where you represent incorporated communities, Shoreline, etc., what does a King County councilman do?
In fact, it's the most frequent question I would get when I'm being out doorbelling, knocking on doors during campaigns. And I'd say, hi, I'm Bob Ferguson. I'm running for King County Council. And they'd say, City Council? And I'd say, no, King County Council. And then the next question was, what does the King County Council do? And it's a reasonable question because people who live in Shoreline, for example, would think of their Shoreline City Councils addressing their very common everyday needs, the zoning, the issues of their sidewalks, that kind of thing, is taken care of by the City Council. King County government is a regional government. So we certainly provide regional services like Metro Transit, wastewater, the courts, the jails, all of those are operated by King County. Of course, for many people who still live in unincorporated King County, which there are not many in my particular district, but of course there are in other districts. There are many people who live in unincorporated King County, and for those folks, we are essentially their local government as well. That we handle all those local issues for those folks. So King County is a little bit unusual. We're both the local government for people who live in unincorporated King County and a regional government providing regional services for people who live in cities.
So for viewers, you are the closest neighboring councilman right along the King County border.
That's
for
correct.
Those communities, Edmonds, Linwood, Montlake Terrace.
That's correct.
You're right next door.
I'm right next door. So some of the issues actually go over with Snohomish County, and on occasion I have reason to meet with Snohomish County council members and talk about issues, transit, there are wastewater, there are others where just because there's a line that divides the county doesn't mean that the issues don't overlap, obviously, between the counties.
I do want to spend a lot of time on those because I think they're interesting from a regional perspective. But I'm also really interested in how you got to this point.
Sure.
Tell me about when you first ran for the King County Council and what that experience was like.
Right. There's a bit of a story there. It was back in 2002. I was thinking about running for King County Council, and the person representing my district at the time had been on the King County Council for 20 years. Her name was Cynthia Sullivan, and she was the chair of the King County Council, and she was also a Democrat. I'm a Democrat now, and as well. And so in thinking about challenging her, of course, it was a little bit difficult. Long-time incumbent, same party, she was quite entrenched, but I decided to give it a shot and decided to run against her. But of course, she was going to outspend me by a wide margin. She had all the endorsements of the party and labor and the environmental community. All that was locked up. So my campaign strategy was actually a pretty simple one, which was knock on as many doors as I possibly could and talk to people at their doors. And so in the end, I knocked on over 20,000 doors, took a leave of absence from my job, and it was quite an experience to meet that many people at their doors, and it had a happy ending, which is not common for running against incumbents. As you know, it's very difficult, but it had a happy ending. It was a very close election. I did squeeze out what became a very big upset, and ultimately did defeat her.
I know for, particularly at that time in partisan primaries,
Yes.
where only essentially Democrats were voting, you could really target people who had often been Democratic voters or were likely Democratic voters. I think one acquaintance of mine said you came to her home 3 times.
There is truth to those stories. It's sort of become an urban legend, actually, a little bit in terms of the doorbelling. But you know, it is. I was at a coffee shop this morning on my way up here to get my morning coffee, and ran to somebody who said, "Hey, you knocked on my door back in 2003, and I never forgot that." So it really was a powerful lesson on many levels, that people really want to get to know their elected officials. You know, shows like this help. Showing up on their door help. That they want to feel connected to their local governments, and that's not always easy to do. And so I think the power of the campaign was the grassroots aspect, going out talking to people, and then going back and knocking on their doors a second or even a third time. You know, I'm from a very large family, and so my mom would be out doorbelling, my dad was putting up yard signs, my siblings were knocking on doors, and there was a funny story of someone who was out waving signs one day near the end of the campaign, and a gentleman drove by me, and he pulled his car over and came up to me and introduced himself. And he said, "I just want to say hello. Not only did you knock on my door, but your mother came and knocked on my door, and then last week your aunt from California knocked on my door. She had flown up to help out in the last week of the campaign." So he said, "You've got my vote." And so I think people responded really well to it, and I learned a lot about my district. When you walk every block of a district, you'll know every possible issue of what neighborhoods want sidewalks, you know, what the issues are at a very, very local level. Who needs a park in their neighborhood? What park needs more assistance for playground equipment? Whatever the very local issue is, you'll learn about it, and people have a chance to talk to you one-on-one at their doorstep.
How many siblings do you have in your family?
There's 7 kids altogether, 6 boys, 1 girl. So I have 1 sister and
Wow.
5 brothers, and I'm near the end. I'm number 6 of 7. So it's a large family, and now, of course, many of my siblings have children, large aunts, uncles. It's a large family all the way around. So it's a campaign army when we put our minds to it.
So you got elected in
Yes.
2003.
That's right.
And were warmly received by your colleagues on the council?
It was a bit of a difficult transition, to be perfectly honest, at the beginning. It's anytime you run against the chair of the council, same party, there were some hard feelings. There was no question about it. And at the same time, the county had some budget difficulties, and I had suggested reducing the size of the county council. It used to have 13 members, and I suggested reducing it to 9. Different parts of county government we'd had to scale back, and I felt, hey, it was only reasonable that the county government itself scale back as long as we were doing the same in other parts of the government. That idea was not terribly well received by my colleagues, although it ultimately did go forward, but they did reduce the council from 13 members down to 9, and that had some big impacts for me as a result.
Yeah, so not well received because that meant some of your colleagues would lose their jobs.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
So then they redrew the district lines, and they said, "Well, you get to face another longtime incumbent."
I think their argument was, it was your idea, so we'll eliminate your district. And
Right.
so that's exactly what happened. My district that I first ran in back in 2003 was essentially eliminated, and I was redistricted into another council member's district, Carolyn Edmonds, who represented District 1 at the time. And so the district line literally goes down to about a few hundred yards from my home, is the border of the district. So just far enough to pick me up and take all of her district and the minimal amount of my district. So it was another uphill fight. I had to go back and run again just 2 years after my first successful campaign.